Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we discuss the Warlord Era in China, period from 1916 to 1928. We discuss how it connects to the formulation of martial art associations, the famous 1928 tournament, and a few other things. Talk about a few of the main characters during that time. Then we switch gears and talk about the spine stretch, the final exercise of the energy gate set. Talk about how to protect your spine when you're doing it, what makes it different from a normal stretch, how to develop strength in the spine without tension. And we talk about the difference between a stretch and a release and what that entails and how it connects with the spine stretch and Qigong in general. If you haven't checked out our Patreon lately, Jess has a new Bagua walking session out, so you can check that out. All right, enjoy the episode and take care.
Welcome back to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. We've been discussing the book Opening the Energy Gates of Your Body by B.K. Francis. And each chapter we've been discussing different teachers of the Chinese martial arts as well as some of the training of the Qigong set. We've reached a point now where we've been sort of exploring the life and times of the Grandmaster Liu Hongjie. He's a really interesting character who lives during very interesting times in China. Last episode, we talked about the Boxer Uprising of 1900, when the ancient times of martial arts kind of came crashing into the modern era when foreign powers invade China, and there's sort of a battle between what you might think of as traditional martial arts against modern weaponry, and that's sort of the end of that era in time. We're going to look forward a little further into the life of Liu Hongjie by looking at his teenage years. Master Liu was born in 1903, from what we can tell, and so during his teenage years is another huge event in Chinese history, which is the fall of the Qing dynasty. The final dynasty, the last emperor of China, is overthrown by the rebellion led by Sun Yat-sen in 1911. So this moment in time takes place, Master Liu is somewhere between 7 and 8 years old when, this huge political event that is a thing that is studied by, so many people around the world, that we're not going to get very far into. We just want to give a little bit of that history, a little sketch of that time period and what it was like for martial arts in China during that time. And obviously, whole thesis could be written on this, but we just wanted to throw about a few thoughts we've had and some of the things we've read about that time period that are really interesting. So this moment of the overthrowing of the Qing dynasty is, a pivotal moment in history. It's one of those huge, just watershed events that changes everything that comes after. And this is the struggles of Chinese government outside of imperial emperor's control. Now a new type of government is being formed. And in this case, it's pretty much military based. There's a lot of hopes and dreams that Sun Yat-sen is an idealist that hopes he can, change the world. But in reality, China falls into a pretty tough stretch and known as the Warlord Era. I wanted to read a little piece here. The Warlord Era was a period in the history of the Republic of China when control of the country was divided among military cliques and other regional factions from 1916 to 1928. The Warlord Era was characterized by constant civil war between different factions. The Warlord Era ended in 1928 when the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek officially unified China through the Northern Expedition. So that's this stretch of time from 1916 to 1928. And there's a lot to say about the politics of that time and all the things that occurred then. But in terms of martial arts, that's also a big time period. That's when the first martial arts books in Chinese are starting to be published for broad distribution. And there's also opening of martial arts that were traditionally very closed. And, especially these imperial martial arts like Tai Chi, Bagua, that are practiced within very cloistered, within the palace, only by the rich and powerful. Now those teachers go out into the public and start teaching. And that's sort of the era we continue to live in today, when teachers now make their living by teaching students rather than fighting in military engagements. And so there's this warlord era when bodyguard caravans and security forces are using martial arts to a very high degree, and the fighting is going on all over China in totally random ways. And this is the teenage life that Liu Hongzhi is experiencing. He's training at the Bagua school that he joined in his teenage years, somewhere around 1917, 1918. So right smack dab in the middle of this warlord era.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it was kind of the Wild West of the China's wild West, right? I mean,
that's a good.
And it's sort of the same time period, right? I mean, you're talking about this late 1800s, early 1900s, where in the West it was gunfighters and cowboys and all that stuff, and in China it was martial artists and warlords, right? And so they had these. I think it was sort of a similar dynamic or world, right, where it's just anything goes.
Anything goes, man.
It's interesting because there isn't a lot.
There's no central authority. There's nobody in charge. Is kind of what's similar.
So there's not a lot written about it because a lot of the things where people would take records of stuff wasn't happening. And I think more relevant to what we're talking about is people weren't doing martial arts in the dojo. They were doing martial arts in these battles against other groups, right? So it was, I think, the roots of a lot of what would later become these martial arts organizations were formed at that time, right? So you would have these factions, these groups that formed, used these martial arts, and then later would develop into essentially martial arts schools. But this was their proving ground, like they were using it in real time.
Yeah, it's a really violent era. There's no central authority. Different warlords are controlling different parts of China. There's a lot of switching sides and backstabbing, and most of all, I think civilians are just suffering in untold horrible fashion with no protection from basically whoever's the strongest takes what they want. And the government of China is struggling to unify itself and put itself together.
Yeah, the best description I heard of it was that there was a revolving door of power, right? That it would just keep, one guy would come in, another guy would go out, and so there was no stability. And it's hard, of course, it's hard. The poor people always suffer the most when in times like that anyway. So
of course. Some of these warlords are really colorful and really crazy sounding. One of them here, Yan Xishan, the model governor, he professed a syncretic creed that merged elements of democracy, militarism, individualism, capitalism, communism, imperialism, universalism, anarchism, and Confucian paternalism into one. Wow. This is this guy is insane. He banned alcohol, lived simply, and wore a common uniform of an infantryman. Whereas another guy down here, Zhang Zongchang, known as the dog meat general, he's described as having the physique of an elephant, the brain of a pig, and the temperament of a tiger. He's a universally detested monster whose ugly, bloated face was tinged with the livid hue induced by heavy opium smoking. A brutal man, Zhang was notorious for his hobby of smashing in the heads of prisoners with his sword, which is called smashing melons.
Oh my God.
This guy is completely out of control. And it sounds like, China's just teeming with these different armies and different factions, just, ambushing and slaughtering civilians and basically terrorizing the place. And I can't imagine they're fighting each other very often. They're mostly just victimizing everyone they can get their hands on.
Wow, that's something else.
This could be one of the most gnarly stretches in human history. So another event that takes place during that time period that's pertinent to the martial arts and the Qigong we've been practicing and studying is that groups of internal martial artists are forming societies and groups to promote their training, to bring it out to the public, to teach people, and to make it something that wasn't just a hidden, closed group, but to bring it out to the public. One of the groups we've been looking into is translated into English as the Esteeming the Martial Society. And here in Beijing, that group is formed in 1912, which is this same time period that the Warlord Era is taking place, or right previously to it. You've got great teachers like Li Cunyi, the famous Xingyi master, Zhang Zhaodong, the great Xingyi Bagua teacher, Han Muxia, another famous one. He's in Tianjin, another branch of the Esteeming the Martial Society. As Chinese martial arts are spreading out into common society and outside the palace and outside sort of the secret doors of where it's being trained indoors, these new groups are being formed. And there's a new movement in society of martial arts coming out to the public. Whereas before martial arts were kept quite private and secret, now they're being promoted and shown to the world at large. And that's where these internal martial arts of China are starting to become well known to the public. And as a matter of fact, they're working together. This is when Tai Chi, Xingyi, and Bagua are starting to formally work together and train together. And one example of that type of group is the famous Jingwu Society, which spread all over the world of a variety of Chinese martial arts, some internal and external in all different forms. It's very popular and has survived to this time. Another example of that type of group is called the Esteeming the Martial Society. This one was formed by one of Liu Hongzhi's teachers. As a matter of fact, a number of his teachers were part of this Esteeming the Martial Society that was founded in Beijing. I'd like to read a little part here that from a book that says, in 1912, Liu Dianchen, Li Cunyi, Zhang Zhaokui, and others launched the Warriors Association in Tianjin and then the Esteeming the Martial Society in Beijing. And here the author says, in the final years of the empire, I served as martial arts instructor in the law school of Tianjin. When the Republic was established, at that time, the Martial Arts Association of Tianjin and the Esteeming the Martial Society in Beijing both selected me to be overall instructor. Consulting with my comrades, we wanted martial arts to invigorate the nation. And so we have compiled textbooks to present their features and preserve a record, publishing and circulating them throughout the country. This is Liu Wenhua, a famous martial arts teacher, writing in 1920 about the events of 1912. So I see this as, the emperor is overthrown in 1911. In 1912 is the founding of this society to promote internal martial arts to the public at large. That can't be an accident. I think that this is part of this newfound movement to bring these arts to the public. So at this time, martial arts stops being seen so much as for warfare between warring factions, but as a way of unifying and strengthening Chinese culture and, just making their country stronger. There's an international perception that Chinese are weak and that they're not strong. So internal martial arts is coming out to prove that they are strong and they can fight back. And the Esteeming the Martial Society is a critical moment in time in this, right at the end of the Qing dynasty. Here's this new group forming almost instantly. It's in a way, perhaps they've been working on this prior to that. And a lot of these teachers are known to have associated before 1912, but it seems like 1912 is a moment in time when they come to the surface and really start promoting the arts. So I'd like to look at another piece of how this history connects with the life of Liu Hongzhi. Here's a translation of the Xingyi Manual of Li Jianqiu. Li Jianqiu is one of Liu Hongzhi's teachers, as well as Master Liu learning from Li's father. The Art of Xingyi Boxing is published in 1919, and Li Jianqiu is a participant in this new modern direction of martial arts. He says here, in a human life, there is no suffering worse than for the body to become weakened and dispirited, and no happiness greater than for the body to be made healthy and whole. Methods of making the body healthy divided into two categories: movement, focusing on muscular development, and stillness, focusing on cultivation of spirit. Seated meditation can be categorized as a form of stillness practice, but gymnastics, as well as Chinese weapons and weightlifting exercises, are all forms of movement practice. However, both of them have their abuses, usually due to absurd ideas about sitting meditation, leading to insanity, or due to the exceeding of limits in movement exercises resulting in stupidity, all because of ignorance of the principles of physical training. So here he's talking about becoming more scientific about the training and really making it for everyone rather than just sort of taking it to absurd extremes, but rather something everyone can do. He says here, in modern times, every nation gives attention to physical education, and it is now considered a field of science. The conclusion of researchers is that body and spirit should be simultaneously trained and thereby evenly developed. By blending them together, the cultivation of moral character is promoted as well. The newly instituted calisthenics follow the principle. While its physical education theory is solid, as an art, it has not yet been perfected. So I think what he's saying here is you're blending together the training of the body and spirit and cultivating moral character as well. That's really what makes Chinese martial arts stand out even to this day. And the author here is, the joint declaration of the Shanghai Martial Art Research Association. Neijiaquan is leader here. You can hear from what he's saying. This is a modern approach to martial arts that are traditionally kept secret. Now they're going to be for everyone. They're going to bring them to the schools. They're going to lead, the merchants are going to do them. The journalists are going to do them. The government officials are going to do them. And he says here, alongside comrades within and beyond the society, we hereby establish our declaration. We will strengthen ourselves to strengthen our countrymen, strengthening our countrymen to strengthen our country.
Yeah, I mean, you have the same thing in the West too with that was when a lot of the physical education became a big part of, the larger educational field, and fitness and feats of strength were real popular, right? Guys getting shot in the belly with cannonballs, or all that strongman stuff. And so this was part of a reaction to that. So the first part of it is saying we already have that. We have an established, because Chinese like things that are established. We have that already. We have a way of developing physical health and physical education already. It's called martial arts. So we should do that. And that will bring us into this, thing of national pride and all that.
Strengthening the nation through martial arts.
Right. But it's specifically through something that was already established and, old. Where in the West, it was more about, look at this new modern, electrical machine that you can plug in that jiggles, right, that jiggles your belly.
Jiggling machine. A new fad of some kind. Whereas the traditional Chinese is to always look back to the achievements of the past and reuse them in a new modern way.
And so especially I feel like with something that's Chinese, right? I mean,
something native, yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like today we're still in this era to some degree. I feel like there was that time, a couple thousand years of martial arts was the premier technology for fighting. Then it changed somewhere around this 1912 area. This warlord period is kind of where things are shifting, and it leads, for 100 years now, martial arts have been seen as this way to cultivate your spirit alongside your physical health. And to me, that's one of the reasons I got into martial arts. And I think a lot of us foreigners do that because we really see the value in, finding the others. It's kind of boring just doing the same physical exercises, and it's fun to incorporate this deeper level of either meditative training. There's morality. There's other aspects that I think when they're woven in with martial arts, make it more complete, make it more satisfying.
Well, yeah. And there was also a parallel in terms of Neigong, right? I mean, this is when a lot of the things like Tai Chi for health came into existence, right? That or names were given to Qigong sets that families had done for 1,000 years, but they stamped a name on it and started teaching it publicly, because that was another way of, again, getting healthy using something that was already Chinese and did actually a really, really good job of it. And so that didn't hurt, but you could see it all over the place. In China, where people started having, I mean, Tai Chi was the biggest probably in terms of martial arts that did that. But what he's saying is, all martial arts are essentially a form of physical education, and internal martial arts, because they add this meditative mind component to it, are doing the thing of also strengthening the mind. And so it
right,
two birds with one stone,
And I think it's safe to say that's what Liu Hongjie, as a young teenager, that was the purpose of his training. He wasn't planning to become a bodyguard or enter into the service of the warlords or even the Imperial Army.
Oh yeah.
He was learning to improve himself and to now not to say that fighting skills wouldn't be useful during a period called the Warlord Era. You know?
I read a few things about martial artists from that era, and most of them, actually all of them, said essentially they started doing martial arts during that era because it was like, well, it's not, things aren't exactly stable. You might as well know how to defend yourself a little bit. The very famous master Sun Ludong did his kind of publicity tour for internal martial arts during that time and went around promoting Neijiaquan, the Tai Chi, Xingyi, Bagua as a single family of training, at that time as well. So, and then he would later write one of the first books on all of those things, really.
And so as this period comes to an end in 1928, when the Republic of China is unified to some degree, under the command of the, famous General Chiang Kai-shek, who sort of crushes the various warlord factions and absorbs others. And he brings his armies into Beijing in 1928, which is the same year that the famous martial arts tournament takes place, where Liu Hongjie, as a young army officer, is engaged in a number of matches and gets to participate in this famous martial arts watershed event in 1928. So his life really connects in with some of the biggest moments in martial arts history and in Chinese history, modern Chinese history. He's on this stage seeing it take place, and it's pretty amazing to think about what it must have been like to see the world change so much from your childhood to your teen years to your 20s.
Yeah.
We can't really imagine it. Moving on to the discussion in chapter 10 of the Tai Chi spinal stretch. This is the final movement of the opening the energy gates form, where you've done the standing, the cloud hands, the 3 swings, and now you end with the spine stretch, which is a really relaxing and nice, forward bending stretch. So to do it, to learn it, take some time and effort and some training, hopefully with the teacher, to help you kind of get the nuts and bolts of it. Because you don't want to overstress your spine when you're doing this, obviously. I'm sure, we've been emphasizing that all along. He mentions here, the spine stretch has as its goal the gaining of complete control over the movement of the spinal vertebrae. Doing this will result in the ability to move each and every vertebrae of the spine independently without relying on any external movement. This level of control is far beyond normal. Most people can barely feel their backs except when it aches. And I think, there's some truth to that. I feel like a lot of us don't really do much with our back until something hurts. And he's talking about an incredibly high level of sensitivity and control and ability to access your spine.
The way I see it is, this is the first stage of a 3-part, really probably more than 3 parts, but big chunk 3 parts of how the different sets do spinal work, right? So this one is essentially taking a fixed point, the bottom, stretching from that fixed point to the top, and then coming back up from the bottom in the front and going up again. So you're always sort of working from the bottom to the top, and you have the bottom as a fixed point. And so that's where the name, I think, the Tai Chi spine stretch is, right? It implies that it's yang first, then yin, right? So you're stretching both ways. It's not just a stretch going forward. And again, if you want to see what it is, you just look at the book. There's a description of it. But the bigger thing about it is, this is the first place in the system where you separate one vertebrae from the next. And you do it in a fairly passive way. You're not pumping it, as it were. You're just letting gravity kind of hang and pull it open. And then using your legs to lift you back up.
That you're not forcing or pushing or even doing anything. You're just simply hanging there and letting gravity do the work for you. And that's kind of how you want to approach the spine stretch.
I think stretch is almost not the right word, because it's really a spine release. Because the way it works is, without going into too much of the specifics, is first you feel the vertebrae open vertically, Then as it bends forward, you open the back of it and you dissolve everything from that point down to your feet. And then when you come back up after you've done all the rest, you're going to dissolve down from that point to your feet. But this time you're going to be opening the front as you do it, right? So it's a release, not a stretch when you're coming up. Well, it's a stretch on the way down, but on the way up, it's really more of a sense of releasing and letting go than it's more, to me at least, than a quote unquote stretch. And the biggest thing about it is that it's, again, from the bottom up, and you're not letting your head go first, because that's most people's initial instinct.
Begin by mentally releasing all of the tension between your sacrum and your fifth lumbar vertebrae. That should be the very bottom one. Interestingly, he says, it is actually possible to slightly separate the theoretically immovable bones of the sacrum, but this is a more advanced practice. So I think working with the sacrum is probably part of heaven and earth, or
that's actually part of that. It's more part of bend the bow. And even then, that movement is infinitesimally small. So here the idea is that your sacrum and your tailbone essentially are the anchor, right? They're the thing that anchor you to your legs, so that as you bend forward, you don't just fall on your face, right? You have to have something keeping your spine attached to the base. Otherwise, you just fall over.
So you're strongly rooted through your legs and your feet. And then from on top of that, it's almost like if there's a flower pot and the flower is doing the bending, but that whole base is just solid as can be right there, and keeps you fully rooted the whole time.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, it's a spine stretch, but your legs are a huge part of it, because they're generating the power to lift you up, and they're providing the stability so that you don't fall forward when you're going down.
So one thing he says here is he's trying to say he doesn't want you to physically stretch. He wants you to release the nerves so that you're stretch. You may be so bound that it takes a few weeks before an actual physical separation of the vertebrae takes place, but you must continue to work on this area with your mind until some sort of release is felt in the nerves or the chi. Over time, this is what will cause the muscles to let go and allow the vertebrae to separate. So he's doing that thing where you're starting from the position of using your mind to affect the area. Instead of sort of lunging forward, you're waiting until your mind can help soothe that area enough to let go of the tension. And that can be frustrating, you know?
Yeah, the way he always put it was, you release in order to stretch rather than stretching to try to get a release. So the first part of it is get it to let go. Once it lets go, there's a bit of slack that you can then kind of use to stretch out. So the mechanism for getting your mind in there and getting the thing to release is essentially the standing and dissolving, right? So this is, on one level, it's a moving exercise, but as much as anything, your intent to dissolve and to release your spine is as big as anything with the physical part. So you can do a very small physical movement, and if you can, on a nerve level or a chi level, release your spine, that will do just as much as if you bent down and touch the top of your head to the floor.
I mean, and so you've done a lot of the training of spine qigong, and this is that doorway that begins the process. Like, what do you have any tips off the top of your head besides don't overdo it and screw up your back?
Yeah, I have lots of tips about doing that. Not going to give them here, but I got lots of tips. I'm kidding. One thing is to really take the sense of push out of it, because the movement, if you're doing a pumping movement, or even if you're doing something like the spine stretch, there's a tendency to want to feel something, to get like feedback. So if you stretch a little bit physically, you'll start to get kind of this tug, and that gives you this feedback. Much like dissolving, the spine stuff is about awareness more than it's about anything else. And so getting your, that's what I mean, what he's saying, right? You have to get your attention in there first and get something to let go. It doesn't have to let go all the way, but at least it has to, make this link. And for me, personally, it took a lot of standing, a lot of squats, a lot of just basic stuff like bending forward without doing the spine bend first to get where I could just do the mechanics of it and not feel uncomfortable. But then the thing that really clicked was somewhere around 10 years out, about doing it for 10 years. I got that I could let go of the thing first and then do the stretch. And it didn't matter if it was the spine stretch or Tai Chi or, it was, at that point, it was anything really. But to get the sense of release first and then allow the thing to stretch out.
Good advice. I know you helped me when I first started in terms of like getting a really good quad squat is kind of what drives the release of your quad squat. Limits your quad squat is what makes your spine stretch effective. You've got to have some squat with each release of each vertebrae in order to really link it through the legs and make it a full stretch or release.
One other thing is to feel the front and the back of the spine, because we tend to focus only on the back of the spine because it's the part we can kind of touch. But you also, to just get your awareness to go to the front of the spine is a big helpful piece of it too.
So looking forward here to another direction, release and stretch each vertebrae one at a time. So here he's talking about how you start by using groups of vertebrae, but over time you go one at a time. And he says it's very helpful to have a partner place their finger on the vertebrae you're trying to release. So your partner goes one vertebrae starting at the very bottom. You do your best to release that one, then the next one, then the next one, and their finger on your back really helps you get the awareness there. So, going one by one, yeah, that's what you do. I mean, there's not much more to say. It takes time, it takes energy to get to identify them as individuals, and that's just a process that comes. The more you do the spine stretch bit by bit over the years, I can attest to that, you start to feel them much more individually over time, but only with practice.
Yeah, well, again, it's like standing or any other awareness practice. It just takes time to get your mind in there and let it sink into it, and just take it slow. And if you're injured, it's going to take longer. So you're going to have to go even slower.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a real good note. If you've got a spine problem, you want to be as gentle as you can be in this process. So the final instruction here is to release the skull plates. The human skull is not one bone, but rather a number of plates joined together by sutures. These plates are capable of being released through voluntary action.
You don't want to push this. So if it happens naturally, cool, but don't try to force it, because trying to force those open can actually damage things.
And I wanted to note one last thing here. And as you're bent forward, you'll want to release energetically from bottom to top again. This ultimately culminates in waves of chi going up your spine to the top of your head and through your arms to your fingertips. So you continue your dissolving practice as you're doing the actual bending of the spine.
Yes. Ideally at each vertebrae, you dissolve all the way down to your feet. But at least when you get to the end, you do sort of one big one.
All right.
Okay.
That's it for now.
That's it for now. Cool. Nice talking to you.
Talk to you later.
All right. Hey, folks, one more thing. We have a Instagram now, the Neijiaquan podcast. And we're going to be putting up pictures related to the episodes, articles, things like that. So just sources from the episodes, so you can get some visuals to go along with some of this stuff. So check that out. All right. Take care. And thanks for listening.